And you know what struck me about Ukraine, and I decided to come to Ukraine because I was actually at Yale on a Poynter Fellowship in February 2014, and I was seeing Maidan happen. And I badly wanted to go to Ukraine, but I couldn't because I was in New York. So as soon as I was finished up with everything, I was sent by a British magazine to cover the aftermath of Maidan for 1 week. And I went in April 2014, and you know what happened. I went to Donetsk. It was the second night that they took the building. Then I went to Luhansk. I was there when they declared the People's Republic of Luhansk. And then I was the first person with another journalist in Sloviansk when they took the police station. It was literally me. I mean, there was no one else. And that was when it changed. Because in Donetsk, I saw, you know, people with balaclavas, with sticks, with baseball bats, with paving that they had ripped up from the side. I saw that in Luhansk, but in Sloviansk, I saw little green men. They were the soldiers, and I know what soldiers look like. Not speaking to anyone, guns pointed downwards, finger not on the trigger, just standing there. And that's when I understood that civil protests had become essentially a war. That's when it all changed, when they took the police station in Sloviansk. I remember that very clearly.
How did you pick the characters? Many of them are actually women. That's very interesting. Also, question maybe later you'll explain why you decided to pick specifically these women. But who are your characters? You seem to come from different angles.
We have all these different characters and how social media is impacting, how social media is impacting their job, their lives in conflict. Now the women thing is very, very interesting because out of 8 characters, 4 were women. Now obviously 50% is what the population of women are. Women are 50% of the population. But it is interesting because war for millennia, for thousands of years, has been an almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively male domain. But it turned out that, and I wasn't even searching for it really, that 50%, you know, ended up being women. And this speaks about the changing nature of war. Because the boundaries between war and peace are changing, are blurring. War and peace are becoming difficult to separate. People still think of war as like a switch. You switch it on and off. You know, like World War II. You know, the Allies and the Axis powers had a fight, and then the Axis were defeated. The Allies won, and then the Axis surrendered. They came to a peace treaty, and the war ended. It's not like that anymore today. If an American or a British soldier dies in Iraq today, are they a victim of the 2003 war? The answer is we don't know, and that's the point.
Well, there's also another, I think, opposition among your characters is that apart from the fact that you have characters from both sides, you also have characters from the side of like civilian or like civilians and the state.
As war is broadened out, so the demographic of people that is broadened out too, which includes obviously women. And as it is broadened out to civilians, this necessarily includes women. Now, as it happens, I've come to the belief that women are better communicators than men. I think they just are for various reasons, which is why I think Farah was very good, Anna was very, you know, they rose to the fore. But, you know, the reason that, you know, 50% of the characters are women is because 50% of society are women. And war now is opening up to civilians. War, you know, your definition of a soldier is changing. I say, you know, when Vitaly joined the troll farm, he joined the Russian army. Now, he didn't wear a uniform, and he didn't fire a gun. But, you know, he didn't need missiles and bullets. He had tweets and shares. So you have to ask, you know, every tweet he posted was like a virtual bullet fired into cyberspace.
And he didn't quite realize it. He didn't
didn't at the time, no. He didn't at the time. But no one really understood at the time what, you know, as it was happening, what was happening.
Of course, it's natural that it seems that the state is, you know, slower in understanding and reacting with all of its bureaucracy. The good example, I mean, vivid example is the Israeli armed forces, how they were trying to get around it. But still, it seems to be that we are at the point where the state is quite aware of what is happening in social media. The state is quite aware of the actors, of the companies and corporations who own the social media, and they can regulate it. So we seem to be in quite a different position than in 2014, 15, and even 16, with now state controlling or, I don't know, building coalitions with the corporations. How does it seem to you?
Look, I mean, yes, states are aware now of the problem. I can testify this from first-hand knowledge. But being aware of the problem doesn't necessarily mean that you can solve it, because state bureaucracies are bureaucracies, which by their very nature are bloated, they are risk-averse, they are slow, they are very worried about their reputations, and they cannot compete with what I could call in the book Homo digitalis. Homo digitalis is the term I give to the networked, hyper-empowered individual that the digital revolution has birthed, that is endowed with abilities beyond what should be normal. And a classic example is Farah Bakker. Farah, in 2014, was three things. She was 16, so she was a child. She was female in a deeply patriarchal society of Gaza, and she was a civilian in a time of war. She should have been the least powerful person. If you wanted to write, you know, a powerless person in Gaza, you'd be a female civilian child in a time of war. But because of social media, because of, not even because of a smartphone, because she owned a smartphone, she became a huge voice of Palestinian suffering. She became a face of Palestinian suffering. She amassed 250,000 followers. She appeared all over the global news. You know, and people like that affect Israel's calculations for the next war going forward. So that is Homo digitalis.
You are saying, there's a thought in your book that, of course, and obviously the social media and the social activity, so to say, cyber activity in social media is changing the structures, changing the way the states are operating. But does it really change the fact that the world basically is still run by a couple of shareholders, be it Google, Facebook, Amazon, you know, being concentrated in one place, and they can just change the algorithm and then the picture will totally change? I
mean, it doesn't change that, it further entrenches it. I mean, it solidifies their power, absolutely. That's why we have a very big problem with the tech companies, and nobody knows what to do with the tech companies, because self-regulation doesn't work. They're not going to self-regulate. Regulation won't work, because you can game regulation, like so many, you know, regulators in the finance industry finish their careers with jobs at Goldman Sachs or other banks. What you need are laws to govern them, laws that if they are contravened, you know, come with huge fines. But for that, you need a president or a prime minister that's going to take on the social media companies. Now, if you're a president, and it's only the president of the US really, are you going to really want to take on Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon? I wouldn't. I don't think any president is powerful enough to take them all on. I don't think they'd want to either. So it's a tricky situation.
You are a journalist yourself, and the question here is, what do the media should do? I mean, there's been a lot of talks after the conflicts, after the Brexit, that the media are losing touch with the audience, and they're just losing again this fight to the bigger corporations.
Gatekeepers of what is news and what is not. Now, I mean, at the same time, you know, take someone like Farah, she still needed to be picked up by the mainstream media. When Donald Trump tweets, the fact is most of Donald Trump's supporters aren't on Twitter. The fact is not that many people are on Twitter, comparatively, compared to Facebook.
Yeah, it dropped.
But the important people are on Facebook. The journalists are on Twitter. So when Donald Trump tweets it, all the journalists write about it. So, you know, there's still, you know, the biggest problem with the press is facing now is that social media is taking all his money, because they refuse to accept that they're publishers. So, you know, I go to Twitter, you know, and a lot of the reason I go there is to look for news. People will post articles, I'll click on those articles. Now, what Twitter and Facebook should do is give the New York Times or the Guardian or whoever a portion of that revenue. It refuses to do that. So, you know, traditional newspapers are suffering financially as a result. And as a result, the quality of news reporting is going down, while at the same time you get other communicative modes and venues and spaces for people like Zelensky to rise, and people like Donald Trump to rise, and alternative news sites to rise.
Would you call it like sort of professional identity crisis for media?
I don't know if it's a professional identity crisis. I think it's a professional financial crisis, and, you know, a threat. Look, the world has always been full of crazy people, right? But crazy people used to be isolated alone in their houses, you know, and write to the newspapers in, as we say in England, in green ink. Now, you find 50,000 other crazy people, and you're not crazy people anymore. You're a movement, and you can find each other, and you can, you have sway, you have power that you didn't once have, and then you set up your own news website, and because you can reach lots of people, you further eat away at, actual traditional journalism.
Mm. There's been a huge discussion among journalists, among also tech corporations, how you tackle propaganda, how you tackle terrorism, cyber terrorism, and how you debunk fake news. And there's a thought that you can't. There's been like lots of TED Talks by Google saying that we created, this video, prioritized, this video explains why ISIS is bad, why terrorism is bad, blah, blah, blah. But does that really work when you are, I don't know, a teenager, you have a Facebook, Twitter, or whatever account, you go into the social media, and then you have the story, like thousands, if not millions, who were drawn into cyber terrorism, into cyber activity by ISIS. I mean, does that debunking and explaining really works?
No, I don't think it does. I think you have to teach social media literacy in schools from a very early age for people to understand how to recognize fake news, how to understand what it is. I think you have to get them very young, inculcated into them. I think it's probably too late. Look, as I say, fact checking doesn't work. If it did, Donald Trump wouldn't be president. Right? You can't just keep saying that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie, because people just switch off. And then equally the fake news purveyors going, no, you're the liar, you're the liar, you're the liar, and it gets everybody nowhere. Mm. The best thing you can do actually in terms of combating fake news is to show, not tell. They say in any writing, show, not tell, if you can actually explain things, and this is what Bellingcat does very well. Mm. So, when MH17, for example, Bellingcat came out and showed everything. And it was very difficult for the Russians to refute. Take the Skripal poisoning in Salisbury in Britain. The British released the video of the two men, which was a very bold move. It showed just how far the Russians had pissed the British off. And they put them on RT and said that they were a couple of tourists. And they were useful idiots, as Lenin called them, useful idiots in Britain who would say, yes, they were just, this is true, this is true. And there was a certain section of the community that would believe them. And then Elliot Higgins and Bellingcat released their GRU identity cards. And then everybody was laughing at them,
What did it change, do you think?
Well, it was, look, if Elliot Higgins had come and said, that's a lie, they are GRU representatives, the guys said, no, you're a liar. When they produced their identities, everyone was laughing at these guys, except the people you're never going to convince anyway. So he showed, not told. The power of visuals, he proved it. You have to prove it, you have to show it. You can't just say this is a lie. And if you can't show it with an identity card, you've got to say, okay, where does this narrative that the Ukrainians put the bomb on MH17 come from? Okay, well, it originated here with RT. Mm-hmm. Now, what is RT? RT is funded by the Kremlin. This is what else RT has done. this story then went to Sputnik. And once you show people the actual chart of everything, then people start to get it. And then you want to say, and people don't like to feel stupid. And then you sort of say, do you want to be do you want to be an idiot? I'm showing you everything. And then it becomes very hard for the majority, the middle majority, to reject it. There will be people you're never going to reach. There'll be people that are always going to be Putinists, whatever you do, or always going to be a sadist. But most people don't really, are in the middle and are not really sure. If you can do things forensically, like Bellingcat does, or just show things rather than shrieking lie, lie, fake news all the time, which is what Donald Trump does, it's far more effective.
Apart from the fact that social media mobilizes people for a certain cause, it's also obvious that part of them, if not the majority of them, stay sometimes united around one cause, and due to the algorithm, they just stay in their so-called echo chambers, bubbles, whatever. And then it obviously, it's also connected to the fact that social media is way more successfully used for business because it's targeting people and bringing products to people in target advertisement, but it's not good for democracy. It's not about diversity. It's not about inclusiveness, and we end up in a situation where societies get more and more polarized.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. Look, take, let's say, Ukraine, Russia. Now, let's say this conflict had happened 20 years ago. You would have had pro-Ukrainians, pro-Russians. but they would have seen the same footage that was produced by the BBC or CNN or whatever. They would have watched the same footage that was professionally edited, professionally shot, professionally reported, and that had to adhere to certain professional standards. Now, pro-Ukrainians and pro-Russians would have watched the same footage. They would have drawn their own conclusions, but they still would have had a shared reality within which to discuss or dispute. Now, if I'm a pro-Russian or pro-Iranian, everything I see, everything I read, everything I hear can be catered to my own beliefs. What that means is, if I'm pro-Russian, you're pro-Ukrainian, we can't discuss because I've seen, I've heard, I've read the truth. That means you're not wrong, you're a liar. Because I've seen it all, I've read it all, I've heard it all.
Yeah,
if we disagree, it's not that, oh, well, I think you're wrong because of this. It's no, you're a liar. I've seen everything. You are a liar. And that's how civic discourse breaks down, and that's how conflict is made easier.
How do you tackle it? I mean, who should be working with that?
Well, I mean,
media, governments.
Look, you have to just keep relying on places like Hromadske, you know, good journalist households. Well, it's true.
Well, we're trying.
Yeah, well, you're excellent. You just need good journalism to drive out the bad. I mean, you have to keep fighting the fight. And it's a fight that, you know, we have one arm tied behind our backs. Because, you know, countries like Ukraine, democracies are always subject to democratic norms that countries like Russia, dictatorships, are not. So, for example, take the troll farm. You know, how many times has it been exposed? Still going. Putin doesn't care. Now, I'm not saying in the West we've never done anything bad, but I know that if you set a troll farm up in downtown London or downtown New York, give it a month, the Guardian or the New York Times would expose it and it would have to be shut down. Putin doesn't care. He's not accountable to his press. We can't do what he can do. So we're always behind. We're always catching up. That we are at a disadvantage. So yeah, it's difficult.
You're saying that states are slow at reacting to certain things.
They are, yeah.
Obviously, but still, how these last 5 years reshaped understanding by the states what is war and how you lead this war. I mean, of course, you have very, very different examples. Israel, Ukraine, Russia,
Yeah.
different, in certain way, similar, in certain way, absolutely different contexts. But still, how individual states are tackling it, and at the same time, how do alliances are realizing that they should be strategizing in a different way, completely different way, like NATO, for example?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of talk. I do a lot of talks with the military. I've given evidence before Defense Select Committee. Everyone understands the problem. Now let's see what's being done to change it. That's the stage we're at. You know, again, it's, you know, I speak to a lot of young army captains who are like 26 years old. We're just going to need to wait 10 years till they're 36 and they're majors, and then things can change, you know? This is the way it is, you know. It's you know, everybody gets it. Getting it is one thing. Acting on it is something else. And this is the problem with bureaucracies, right? Because the type of things I suggest is like, what do you do with an army? Like, how do you make an army fluid?
You do an army of bloggers. This is what happened also in Ukraine.
Sure, you need a network. That's what you do. You need a network. But it can't be the army, because the army literally operates on a chain of command. Literally operates on a chain of command. Now, this takes time. You need to get permissions and permissions and permissions and permissions. It takes time. You know, if you're fighting on Twitter, you need to react instantly, let alone 10 minutes, let alone an hour, let alone 2 days to get the permission to tweet. This is the problem that we have. This is the problem Alberto Fernandez had in my book.
The proofreading of the content, the editorial.
Yeah, and this is the guy, he's working for the State Department of the most powerful government in human history, and he gets his ass kicked by a bunch of probably 15-year-olds on Twitter. So this is, you know, something that would have been inconceivable even 10 years ago. But this is the new reality. And everybody gets it, but still we're not doing anything about it yet. We're doing little things, it's true. People understand the need for third-party messengers. People understand the need for networks. But how do you make... Now, a hierarchy or a bureaucracy is still a form of a network, fine. But the fundamental issue is we live in a world governed by hierarchies when we really need networks. Now, you're just not going to change hierarchies into networks, okay? The army is not going to disband its horizontal, its vertical chain of command and become a network. It's never going to happen. Neither is government. So it's just about creating networks around them of certain types of people that are given a degree of autonomy but still functioning under the umbrella of state institutions, and that needs to be done.
Yeah, okay, the idea of social media also sold to the people the idea of networking and...
Sure.
But still it's a hierarchy, and you're saying that the states are slow, but they're still approaching in a certain way. Take China, for example. It still holds control over lots of things in the way China holds control of everything else.
China, yeah.
Well, China is a giant, but...
So, and also it's a totalitarian regime. You couldn't do in London, in England, what China does. People wouldn't stand for it.
Yes, you take Russia, and it doesn't seem that all the possible networking and mobilization works for Russians as well. It seems like the Russian propaganda is still at its peak. Putin has his support.
Sure.
And no matter how many Facebooks you have in Russia, nothing seems to be changing.
But that's because Putin was smart. He just understood, or the Russian state understood, because they have a history of active measures and stuff, that, don't ban these tools, just use them against your population, and they do it very effectively. That's why Pomerantsev, Peter, my friend, calls, the postmodern dictatorship. You don't put people in the gulag anymore, you don't kill them anymore, you just, you fine them for tax irregularities or zoning, or you close them down for zoning violations. It's the same principle. They did, they just controlled, they took VKontakte, now they control VKontakte, so they fill it with their own content. China's different. China shuts everything down. It doesn't allow Google, it doesn't allow Facebook.
Well, Ukraine shut down all the Russian social media networks as well.
What I'm saying is Ukraine doesn't have a model where it censors the entire internet to keep its population walled in. This is a very uniquely Chinese thing, and I wonder how long that can last anyway.
Last question. What do you think is the best way for the governments and for civil society to stay in touch with their own people? I mean, with all that happening, with all these echo chambers, whatever, how do you stay in touch with reality?
I think you
reality doesn't matter anymore.
You need to, reality does matter. Reality matters more than anything. That's the battle we're fighting. Get out of the capital cities. Just got to get out there. This is one of the great problems of journalism, that so many local newspapers have closed down, which were the lifeblood of journalism, really. And now, civil society, politicians just have to get out of London, get out of Kiev, get out of DC. They have to go around the country and speak to people, even if it's face to face. You do town halls, you do all these sorts of things, but it needs to be done, because in Brexit, with Zelensky, with Trump, it's clear that elites are losing touch with the people, and that is very, very dangerous.